Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our Higher Up series. Today, I'm talking to Sophie Lee of Sophie Lee Global. Now, Sophie is an executive coach and seasoned HR professional who's worked for some global brands in her time. Sophie's got a lot of experience in terms of global HR trends and working with big enterprises to manage HR tasks and challenges across the globe. Now, Sophie and I have known each other for about 12 months now, and we've met up at various events around Austin in particular. And I've seen Sophie speak and was very, very impressed. And we've had a few conversations around different topics, but one that keeps coming up is Gen Z. And Sophie, you and I were at Disrupt back in May this year, Disrupt Austin. And I'd say 70% of the content was around Gen Z. And Sophie and I got talking about the topic of, well, I wonder if different countries see the same trends and the same things we're seeing. So if you might, I guess, what might be good is if you can give a little bit of a summary on your side as well of your background, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the topics that we've been chewing over for months now and go through it. But in essence, what I saw at Disrupt was trends around two key things with Gen Z is in the workplace need very clear training and development path and career development, and they need hyper-personalized training. And those are two things that lots and lots of speakers and employers are talking about, how they need to master this to be successful with Gen Z workers in the future. So that was kind of the essence, wasn't it, Sophie? So I guess what might be quite good, if you want to give us a little bit of background about you, and then we can bounce around some of the stuff that you noticed in your trip to Japan, because when we last met, you were heading off to Japan shortly after. And that's what kind of started the topic about, well, are other countries seeing the same challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me here, Giles. I'm super excited talking about all these topics. And just a little bit about me. As you mentioned, I've been in, kind of professionally in the HR space, mostly in global roles, almost throughout my entire career. And, I'm originally from Taiwan. So, I worked there for a few years before I found myself in the US. And so far, I've been in the US for 14, 15 years. And in middle of it, I had an opportunity to go work in Sydney, Australia, to look after Australia, New Zealand region for a couple of years. And during my global roles, I just enjoy working with people from every part of the world, in APAC, in EMEA, in the US, and just really having the opportunity to learn from them, right, culturally, and also learn a different way of thinking and different perspectives. And I always cherish those moments, just kind of, having that learning opportunity about, and having a window through them into their own culture aspect. And so, kind of back to what we had initially discussed around this Gen Z or the generational differences. And it's so important that we understand or we appreciate the fact that there's no good or bad attributes about all the generations, right? And, there's always some background why certain generation has certain attributes, right? Because of the economy situation they grew up in, because of workforce situation that they were part of, and that formed their beliefs and value systems around the world they were living in right back in their days. So same thing with Gen Z. And I think a lot of the kind of in their formative years, right, Gen Z has the blessing of easy access to internet, almost like globally. And so they share a lot of kind of common grounds when it comes to, social media, right? They can just get on, say, TikTok, or go to like Facebook, or, YouTube, right? Some of them are even YouTubers, and they are having a lot of fun, right? Creating their own channels, sharing their own content that's equally accessible to all parts of the world. So the access to information is so readily available to them. And so there is some baseline as to how they think, about their world, because there is some shared, right, like environments, easy access to internet, same access to some of the major social media platforms. That said, right, I think it's also equally important for us to be aware of not all Gen Z individuals are created equal, given that they also grow up in different parts of the world and they have kind of different, understanding about their own unique like region or country that they grow up in. So for example, you touch upon, in Japan. So back in the days, right, there is this strong kind of culture about salaryman where, you would just work and go to the office and work like nonstop, right? And you may have, a little bit of time, like go home and take a nap, and you have to go straight back into the office environments. But, nowadays, as I was talking to my friend in Japan, he said, well, it's not really the culture, the working culture right now in Japan for a couple of reasons. One is because the economy situation in Japan has changed or has evolved significantly from the era of salaryman, that a lot of people back in the days, right, being a salaryman, you're being rewarded by being loyal to your employer, right? You continue to progress through that corporate ladder, but it's not as easy to do that nowadays. So people now realize by exploring their options externally might be even more rewarding for their own career growth. And also nowadays, the wives or women also play a key role in the workforce. So most of the time, actually, both couples are working in the same time. And so they will have shared responsibilities when it comes to childcare. So it's not only no longer feasible for just having, the husband go to work, right? It's also not feasible for, just one parent to be readily available to their children. So that culture has significantly shifted today. And if I were to think about my own home country, in my recent conversations with my friends in Taiwan, the culture, the working culture also shifted in a similar fashion where now people do value more on the work and life balance, or say kind of the integration, right? Back in the era where like people definitely prioritize career as the top priority of their life, but also with the understanding about, it might take longer time for them to kind of continue to climb up the corporate ladder, and the resources are not readily available to them now versus where they were back in, several decades ago. They definitely want to have a better work-life balance and better work-life integration.
What struck me, I remember reading lots about the salaryman culture at the time over the last 20 years. And we spoke, one thing, alcohol was a big factor. It looked to be a big factor in terms of the pressure to entertain clients and customers after work, night after night. You were expected to be there by your boss and your team side. Interestingly, we read a lot now about Gen Z and millennials coming through, not really interested in alcohol. So that whole culture has changed. I started my early career working in London, in the city of London. And again, it was very alcohol fueled, long hours, sleep under your desk, kind of bravado, not as extreme as the salaryman culture, but I remember that was very much prevailing thinking in the 90s and early 2000s. And that's what interested me, I guess, with somewhere like Japan, where it was in the extreme. I say to you, you'd read the stories of seeing workers asleep on the metro, on the trains, coming back from their late nights, entertaining, or just sleeping in the office. I mean, it sounded quite a miserable way to live, but it seemed to be, if you wanted to get ahead and as an executive in Japan, it was the only way. And I guess that's what interesting with you being back there. That's such a dramatic shift to move away from that. It must be quite a brutal shift away from it. And so I'd be interested if you've seen any of the insights on that. The other bit as well is we talk a lot about productivity nowadays with the demand for flexibility, work from home. And again, I think, a lot of the Gen Zers, millennials I deal with, it's embedded that thinking now that I want my work environment to suit me. What did you notice anything with that in Japan, and like talk about shifts in productivity? Because you often wonder with that salaryman culture, those extreme hours and commitment, were they actually any more productive than today's generation? Do you have any, is there any insights or any experience on that at all?
Yeah, so I think back in the salaryman era, right? Um, it was expected. There was this kind of strong social expectation that you know you gotta be part of the team, right? And being part of the team back in the days meant you spend a lot of time hanging out with your colleagues, hanging out with your clients if you were in the client facing type of role, right? And going to a bar, right, drinking was considered, is how you hang out. Like that was the norm back in the days, and you're expected, right, to kind of blend in and play being part of that. But it's not really the expectation nowadays. I think Gen Z in general, right, and this is kind of really generalizing Gen Z across, the world, right? They have a higher kind of desire for, healthier lifestyles, and so drinking excessively just isn't their, that's not their thing. And as they think about kind of their expectations about the workforce, right, the workplace, it also has shifted from being just a job is a paycheck, right, putting food on the table for the family, to now work means more than just a paycheck. They want to work for an employer that has really contributed to the betterness, right, of the world, right? They want to feel their job is more than just a job. They are creating positive impacts on in the world, right? And they want their employers to have a stance on certain social topics, and be involved in the community, right? And so that work like has a very drastic different like it's meaning to them compared with their parents, right, and the generations beyond. And the other thing is they also would like, some of the Gen Zs, right? They even are not interested in pursuing, like, say, leadership roles or manager roles, because they feel like, well, if my priorities have, good work-life balance or integration, right? Their perception of being a manager is that's going to take away what they value a lot, which is work-life balance. So, I was just talking with some of the HR professionals the other day, and we were like, wow, we may have a gap in the leadership bench strength, right, with the Gen
Yeah.
Z population. So, what are we going to do about it, right? It is to kind of coach them through to think about leadership roles differently, right? And how they want to embed the generational kind of value and attribute. Maybe it's going to be a different type of leadership style and philosophy, right? But it's definitely not an option for us not to have leaders, right, when they are passing down to this Gen Z population as we continue to progress in the workforce.
Are any leaders, and again, I guess you and I we picked on Japan because at the time all the buzz in Austin was about generational differences and how do you adapt to be successful with your workforce in the coming decade. And then we that's what we were thinking. Well, okay, we get it. Everyone's digging on these topics, but I wonder what they're doing elsewhere in the world. And you were literally off to Japan at the time. So with that, are there any superstars you saw out there, or anyone who's forging ahead or doing things differently from a organizational cultural development or leadership perspective? Is there anyone you came across, or anyone you're in contact with, or that you watch that might be doing something different?
You mean in Japan or just
In Japan? Yeah.
Yeah, I have not, to be honest, because I wasn't there on a business travel, so I
Yeah.
didn't really kind of expose myself too much in that aspect. But I would assume that the younger generation definitely has taken on a different approach in terms of how they kind of handle this
Yeah.
leadership style at work. And maybe one thing I can share was So my friend in Japan, right? He is Japanese, right? He grew up in Japan, and we met back in our school days here in the U.S. So he has, I would say, equal exposure, right, to the Japanese culture and the West and the U.S. culture. And later on, he returned back to Japan and continued to work for a HR consulting firm. And what he had shared was during, I would say, probably the pre-COVID years, right? The expectation was for him, or really for all employees, right, to like go to the office and show up in the office every single day. But during COVID years, as we know what happened in the world, right? So he was working from home like 100% remotely. Now the post-COVID era, where it's not really a station for him to go into the office. He said he probably goes into the office once or twice a month at maximum, right? And he needs to get off work right by 4 p.m. to go pick up his kids, from daycare. So it's a very different life he's living now compared with before the COVID situation happened.
I guess this is what was interesting. It's kind of an affirmation in a way, because at the time, what we were seeing in Texas and in the US, and what I was seeing in the UK, in a work culture that was at the time as extreme as it was in Japan, has adapted the same way. So it was just, it was seeing if there were any pockets of resistance or anything different out there. One thing I was going to touch on as well, I think is a factor I've seen frequently. This is the concept of the side gig. Now, lots of people I speak to on my work across Texas, and particularly I'd say Gen Z and millennials, the idea of they have their day job, but they have a side gig. And that side gig may or may not be related to their core skills. Now, as you know, I work in technology, so I do a lot of technology staffing, but I've got people that run pickleball clothing businesses on the side, and it's a real passion. I've got lots that are doing AI innovation, little startup. I say little, that sounds condescending, it'll be that way, but they've got some side gig that they're building and they're very passionate about. And I know in my day, there wasn't time. You were that committed to your employer. There wasn't time. There wasn't mental space left to do that. But that's something I've seen really prevalent. And it does, I wondered whether it's tied to maybe feelings about having more control over your own destiny, not being reliant on an employer, a single employer for your future, but being able to set your own path. Because I know you did Australia and New Zealand as well. And one thing that was interesting, because I lived and worked in New Zealand from about 1998 through to about 2008. So I did about 10 years. And I worked for a variety of brands out there. And I went straight from London, from this watered down salaryman type culture of big hours, big drinking, big salaries, to New Zealand. And New Zealand is all about lifestyle and beaches, and it's a beautiful place. And I guess what struck me early on was thinking back, that side gig aspect was prevalent back then, 30 years ago. Everyone I spoke to at all ages had some side hustle, but they saw themselves as entrepreneurs. It wasn't just a side gig. It was, I'm building this thing on the side for my future and for my family and my future. And I thought it was great at the time. I think New Zealand, for its size, in terms of the level of entrepreneurs that it turned out, huge, massive. But the other bit that was interesting is that balance on focus on entrepreneurship. There was that balance of, I want to enjoy my work. And I remember I'd only been there a few weeks, and I joined a big retailer, kind of the equivalent of Target in the US. They were a big dominant retailer. And we went to a team meeting with my new team, and there was about 15 of us in the boardroom. And I'm used to really formal, stuffy meetings in London with the suit and tie and all that. And here we are, business casual. And my manager comes in into the team, and he has this big tray with this thing in metal foil in it. I'm thinking, what the heck is this? And he sits down, says hello to everyone, opens this up, and it's a smoked fish, big fish called a snapper in New Zealand. And there's this smoked fish sat on the table in front of us, and everyone just leans across and starts grabbing handfuls of this fish and eating it. I'm kind of horrified. I'm like, what? What is this? And it was just, it was the norm. Well, we're having a meeting. He caught some fish at the weekend, smoked it at home, bring it in, share it. We talked over it, and it was more of like a family gathering type culture that they had, and it really kind of brought home to me some of the fundamental differences culturally. And I think that's why Australia and New Zealand have always had that balance right. They've had the side gig bit right. I haven't spoke to anyone in my network out there since to see from a Gen Z perspective, but I suspect they'll feel the difference less because their core culture is very much around that. My employer doesn't really define me or my happiness, I do. But yeah, it was fascinating that shift, and for me, it feels like it's coming back a little bit to that. But do you see that side gig thing as well with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was in Australia, right, I kind of felt similar things, right? It's compared with, US, right, which was the culture I moved, from before I arrived in the Aussie land. And definitely the Australian culture is very like family focused. So what they do, right, after work, they go to the beach because they have beautiful ones, plentiful over there. And they do like on holidays, right? They do barbecues and they just go out and having a good time. And so they really don't take, I would say they don't really take work too seriously. I mean, in a good way, right? So they come to work, right? They do a good job, but they don't let work bleed into, right, like the overall quality of their personal life, because they want to spend time with their families, with their friends. And I probably just, share an example because it was a little bit of culture shock when I first arrived in Australia. I remember when my colleague told me that, he was on vacation, he will be on vacation, and he will be in Italy for about a month, right? And I guess back in the culture of the US, right, I was expecting that I might still be able to reach him in some shape or form, right, in some way while he was gone. No, it was gone for the entire month. So no response to like emails whatsoever. And and so that was a culture shock for me. It's like when someone's on vacation, they are like truly unplugged, right? So it's a good way in terms of like you are able to fully disconnect. But that's really the culture there, because people really do not expect you to like work when you're on PTO. But it's just kind of, for me, it was a little bit of culture shock. Even if I would compare back in my working days in Asia, that's not the culture. That's definitely not the culture known back there.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I guess because I've been racking my brains with my own business and in terms of advisory for my clients, because it's, as you'll know for yourself, it's a hot topic across our industry at the minute. How do we attract and retain new talent coming through to the market, and particularly the Gen Zers? And just having funky offices isn't really enough. I mean, that's been and gone. That thing. How do you build that authentic culture and approach? And it got me thinking. I had, again, going back to New Zealand. This is back in 1998. I got to meet an entrepreneur at the time, a young entrepreneur working out of his lounge at the time. He actually did my first website for one of my businesses in New Zealand back in about 98. A guy called Vaughan Rousel. And it was funny. He was just very laid back, very cool. He said, "Yeah, I'm building all these different things." And I actually then set up a staffing business and then helped him with staffing for his first business, which was an early version of Google Maps before Google Maps was a thing. And he kind of had that vision, built it out. Ultimately, it kind of failed because Google Maps then came in and just crushed it. But he then went and built a retail point of sale solution called Vend, which he went on to sell for lots of money. And but what was interesting with him is his philosophy from the outset was, I'm going to enjoy my work and all my team are going to enjoy it. And I remember, I thought he was crazy at the time, but with this, we had offices in Auckland, and he decided he was going to relocate and set up new offices way up. If you know New Zealand, it's a long, thin strip, and it's about 4 or 5 hour drive to get from Auckland to the top. Okay. And subtropical beaches and weather at the top, but there's not a lot of business up there. It's not a tech hub, okay? And he said, yeah, I'm moving up there. I'm moving up north, and I'm going to get as close to the beach. My team can go surfing in the morning. They can go surfing on their lunch. They can go swimming. They can do whatever they want. I remember thinking, this guy's crazy, but he was kind of ahead of his time. And I was trying to recruit for staff to say, hey, Sophie, I need you to relocate 3 hours north. You're going to be in idyllic surroundings, cheap housing, beach time as much as you want. And yeah, and he built that up, and he built a culture, a great culture that went on to be, huge, and the business just grew massively. And if you're familiar with Xero, the accounting software, that's now quite dominant globally, that was a New Zealand brand. And I remember meeting the founder at the same time, and the brands grew at a similar rate with that kind of culture of just love your work, but it doesn't dominate your life. And yeah, and it was fascinating to see. And because I'd come from London, and I'd come from such a harsh mini salaryman culture, I really was quite skeptical of this at the time. But now looking back, I think it almost feels like we've come full circle, coming back to that now, is where we're at nowadays, of what we've got to provide.
Yeah, and as you were talking about, right, like your experience working in New Zealand, it kind of reminded me that actually after I came back from Australia to Austin, then I started working for a couple of Australian headquarter companies in a row. As I guess, as the universe would have me do that. So, you were talking about like people design the work around the lives that they want to live.
Yeah.
And, the story about how the two founders of Atlassian started the company was because, at the time they just graduated out of college, right? They didn't want to work for a company that they had to suit up. So they say, why don't we just start a business so we can wear t-shirts and jeans to the office? And that's exactly what it did, right? And the company culture continues to be very kind of casual and formal, how the company operates, even like, wow, probably 15, 20 years later, right? Because that's something they want to hold true in the company, right? They want it to be like, there's not a lot of kind of corporate formality, right? How they do work. They really focus on being agile and just kind of having that initial spirit, right? That the why they started the company, right? And when I think about the other Australian headquarter company that I later worked for, it is a startup, right? So the founder is based in Brisbane. So he kind of started a company, right? Because, he was working in a corporate and he was doing his kind of side hustle, but then later on, right, that business just grew to a level where he realized, actually, I can make a company out of this, right, business. And that's what he did, exactly. So there is definitely a lot of like entrepreneurship, like spirits, sounds like in Australia and New Zealand. And I'm seeing more and more of those with Gen Z is, yes, work is almost like they're looking their life almost like as a portfolio, for lack of better words. So, the work that they do during the day, just one aspect of their work, right? But then, they have their passion, projects, right? They have their hobbies. They would, create a YouTube channel, or they would do some videos online, whatnot, or they go and open like a dog grooming shop because they have their dogs and they love their dogs and they want to share the love, right? Making sure that other dogs also are taken care of. Or some people would want to play pickleballs, right? So they may make a side hustle out of that, teaching people how to play pickleballs. And there is no like the boundaries of what we used to consider, right? The work and the life aspects, like the boundary is the line is very blurred right now because they really look at their life as a whole and just kind of different aspects of their life all come together to contribute to what kind of life they want to live.
And it's it's big. It feels like a big thing, I think, for current leaders to get their heads around. And then again, if we take Disrupt Austin as an example, we're 14 speakers, of which you were one of them, I might add. And I'd say 10 of the speakers were talking about how to get to grips with generational differences. What do you need to do? And that hyper personalized learning was something that's quite interesting, making learning enjoyable but highly relevant to the individual, because your typical Gen Z nowadays, and for us as well, is surrounded by hyper personalized content, typically on maybe their mobile phone or their laptop, but then normally their mobile phone. And they expect it. It's the norm to have everything tailored and optimized for them and their preferences, their likes, their dislikes. So why would my training not be the same? I mean, the days of maybe our days, Sophie, of sitting in a classroom, having someone at the front reading off you know, A0 sheets, that's gone. That's long gone. So I think training was a big factor. I remember became a hot topic, and I wonder how that's kind of filtering through now. But interesting, this I guess to loop back to the Japanese theme that we struck out on was because, I mean, think back to lean manufacturing, areas like Kaizen, if I'm correct, they all originated out of Japan and had a huge effect on industry. I'm a big motorbike fan, so I know, look back on the effect that the Japanese motorbike industry had here in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and just dominant. So what was interesting, I remember at Disrupt, was one of the examples was given of hyper personalized training. I think it was Toyota now in their manufacturing plants with their young apprentices. And interestingly, it was male and female apprentices wear headsets with augmented reality overlays onto, say, if it's an engine or component assembly line, rather than being sat in the classroom for weeks on end doing video training and, working with simulators. Now they have augmented reality overlays onto the assembly line to show them what to do to learn as they go along, which I thought was pretty cool. So I think that was probably where it struck home for me, is that's where the adaptations, I think many employers can make quick adaptations now, is looking at their training and development and getting that modernized and hyper personalized. The idea of bringing in a trainer to stand at the front of a room and talk doesn't work anymore. Well, it works, but it's not relevant. So
Yeah.
do you see anything on that side with training and development? Have you come across anyone doing anything cool or not doing it right?
Yeah, I definitely agree that the traditional way of, training and learning, it is no longer working in a way where, as we're thinking about Gen Z, right? Like they like to have fun, right? Which is a great attribute. So, and the average attention span is actually much shorter, right? Because they have so much information coming at them at any given time, right? So is about how you gamify, right? Like training and learning, and how you make it feel like it's a journey, right? They're part of. It's not just something that they're given that they have to follow, right? They can be part of the journey in terms of deciding what kind of career path they want to be
Yeah.
on. Do they want to continue to grow, say, for engineer? Do they want to continue to grow to a principal level, right, to become a fellow? Or do they want to switch over to a leadership track, right, and become a leader, right? So they want to understand what that means to them, and they're a part of the journey of making a decision for their own careers. They don't like to be told, right, this is what you should desire, right? I think, if we can use less of the you should, right, or you
Yeah.
must, that kind of communications, but in a way really treating them as adults and having those adult conversations is like, let's explore this together. And they really like to be involved in those discussions and feeling like they're part of something bigger, and they have a say in the process, and that's really important for them. And as I'm, in the past, I also had some team members, right, in my work that they were Gen Zs as well. So definitely they want more real-time feedback. They did not want to have like, okay, let's just have a discussion about my performance at the end of the year. They would rather to have that discussion like right in the moment, and they value those feedback like real time in person, and some will probably prefer it in a less formal way. So it's a very different kind of setting compared with the previous generations, where kind of talking about my own career upbringing, right? I was more used to having performance discussions, right? Maybe once or twice a year, right? And I was more accustomed to, right, like having my leaders, right, to kind of map out what are career options for me. But with a younger generation, they definitely want to, create their own path almost, right? And then they treat it almost like it's an exercise. I want to do it with you, my leader, but they have their own thoughts, right, where they want to take their career. And they are not, they're not shining away or afraid of, speaking up, right? When they see something they want to be done differently. So it's definitely a more kind of vocal generation, but I think the good way where they know what they want and they also know what they don't want, but they
Yeah.
need a leader who can be part of the journey and kind of share that ride with them.
Yeah. And I agree. And I think one topic that's I've thought about a lot in the few years I've been working, particularly the Austin market, and the number of startups I've worked with and seen some thrive and some struggle, is looking at the leaders in those organizations and who stand out and who I think will thrive with this new generation coming through, and why is it? I think one of the things that I wouldn't say keeps me awake, that sounds a bit dramatic, but I don't see many that I think you've nailed it, you've got it. One thing that was interesting, particularly post COVID, in that late 21, 2022 gold rush, where funding was cheap, VCs were throwing money at anything, particularly anything that had the word AI in it. And I many of the CEOs I dealt with, I'd say were salarymen, psychology, salarymen type um, beasts. And it was the idea of work till you drop. We're not going to build this unless we're almost killing ourselves. I think at the time salaries were huge. People wanted to get on the rush, so there's many on there. But we saw a huge number of, I think, quite unhappy employees in those organizations, but they were paid a lot of money and were saying, right, I'm just going to get to that point. I'm going to check out and take some time out, or I'm going to retire early. I'm going to buy my ranch a couple of hours north of Austin, and I'm just going to check out. And it was interesting. And it was only a couple of years ago there was that elements of that salaryman, maybe minus the alcohol bit, drive. And now it's spun the other way. And in my daily work, when I'm talking to CEOs and leaders, I'm trying to see, well, who has that element, that entrepreneurship balanced with empathy and warmth. Because the one thing I remember, those leaders I mentioned in New Zealand from all those years ago, they were humble, they were quite genuine, they had a vision at the time, even if the vision changed, if it developed, but they were very humble, and there was something about them. They were very approachable. They didn't have big egos. They were very bright. That was a consistent thing. They were very smart, but they didn't wear it on their sleeves. You knew they had their depth of knowledge, but they were kind of quiet leaders, is what I guess the way I'd look at it, and slightly crazy in some ways as well. I think some of the things they did, I remember thinking back, thinking, this is mad. Not in a bad way, but just again, it'd be a bit like you saying, right, I'm just going to put my new head office next to the lakes, and the team can go boating and swimming whenever they want through the day, and we're just going to have a barbecue running around the clock, and it's going to be one big party. It's a bit like that. Back and I look at what they built, and how it's endured. I think there's maybe elements of that now that need to come back into play, to really help Gen Z thrive. And it's tough. It's tough with me. In the business I'm in sales, I think sales is one that's grappling the most, because it is very much grind it out, But I've 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 struggled myself to grapple with making it work with Gen Z employees coming through. It's been really tough. So I'm as vested in learning about this, I think, as anyone, which is why I think it's fascinating. And it's great. It's great to chew it over with you, and particularly that sometimes to sanity check that international point, and nowhere more maybe different from a work culture or historical work culture than say Japan, to say, well, how are they adapting? And it's interesting, like you say, in your experience from your contacts and your friends out there, that they've gone through the same shift and they're at the same point. It's not really that different.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how you describe it, right? Back in your days in New Zealand, right? They build an office and headquarters, right? Like literally on the beach or by the beach. And I would say probably put in a modern day like HR term, right? That's great employee perk or benefit, right? And I think, as we're talking about that, right? Something just kind of came to my mind and said, at the end of the day, it's really all about, is the way of working sustainable, right? Because when you describe like in some of the in some of the startup culture, right, it's really about people started a company because they had like tremendous passion, right, for what they believe is gonna come to life. And people join startups because they really believe in the mission, right, and in what the company is capable of, right? But the way of working, right, is really going to come down to, oftentimes, right, heavily attached to the founder or the founder's philosophy or their own belief system. Is it that just grinding out until we hit the big day, right? Or that's build a company culture where like everybody can really enjoy and continue to contribute, right? This is not just like, hey, we're coming and just have fun, right? We work hard, we play hard, but is this a more kind of sustainable way of working? And the salary man kind of mentality, right? It will work until a certain point, right? Because we're all human beings. I think we sometimes really need to factor in this humanity aspects, right? Of what people can actually do, right? For in the long haul, right? And working like 20, 24 hours, it's just not.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess one of the bit I was going to bounce off you is I guess the difference between someone who's working a side gig because they want to build it out to be their main venture. Typically, they're not really enjoying their current job is paying the bills. And I've been there. I've been there. I did a job I really didn't like for a global IT brand. Hated it, and but it gave me the impetus and the idea and the vision to move into setting up a staffing business. So I'll always be grateful to it, but it set me down that path. But I still see people like that nowadays where they've got that, they're going to build something. But the difference I've noticed with lots and lots of the Gen Zers that I deal with, particularly in Austin and Dallas and the candidates I speak to, is they've got the side gig, but it's not necessarily the thing they want to define their future or they see themselves building out to scale. They're doing it because they love it, they're passionate about it, because they're learning something new. And that was quite an interesting difference for me, because I've had a few Gen Zers say to me, they've asked me, the events I do, how did I build my business? How did I get it off the ground? How did I grow it? And lots will say to me, I'll say, well, what's your side gig? What are you doing? And they'll tell me and the different things. But they say, I can never do what you do. I couldn't take the stress, the sleepless nights. And I'm thinking, well, that's standard. If you want to build a business. Oh, are you back? I
Yeah, so
lost I lost you briefly.
difficulty.
No, it's all right. I was just I think I was just recapping there, Sophie, to say a few of the speaking events I've done. I've had lots and lots of young entrepreneurs come up to me, or young professionals, and say, "How did I build my business? How did I get into it? What was it like?" I ask them about what they're looking to build, and they've all got ideas. They've all got seeds of ideas they're trying to build, things they're trying to do. But one thing I hear a lot is they say, oh, couldn't take the stress or the strain, the sleepless nights that you did, the grind. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you can't build a business without that. I don't know anyone who has, or you can. So I think that struck me as one subtle difference with a lot of the Gen Zs I speak to is they have a side gig, but it's not something that's maybe going to, they intend to grow it into a huge mega business, or, it's a passion. It's not a hobby. It's more than a hobby. It's something they can learn from. It makes them happy. Yeah, it might make some money, might not make some money, but that doesn't seem to be the primary thing. Whereas with me, when I ventured out, I kind of staked everything on building this business with a business partner. Everything was on the line. There's no option to fail. It was full on, and it was that salaryman evenings, weekends. I think that seems to be the difference nowadays with the next generation of entrepreneurs coming through, and young workers are doing it differently. They're coming up with new ideas and new concepts, but they don't necessarily feel the need that it's going to be their thing that defines them. So I'm interested in watching that with interest to see how that goes over the next few years, and who are the ones that have the element to really make it work. That's probably the key thing for me. And I know you've worked in some big organizations that are very innovative in terms of what they do. So I guess as we speak over the coming months, it's going to be interesting to see what you notice about those cultures or those work cultures and work practices that are fostering that innovation coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting to kind of hear your observation, right? And kind of your interactions with the Gen Z, right? Entrepreneurs, right? They really think about their passion projects, right? Like how I guess how we the non-Gen Z generations define their passion projects more like hobbies, right? We're like, well, you're not really like fully committed to what you want to do, right? You're not spending the time that you should, right? Like to build it into a business. I don't know, maybe they feel differently about their hobbies, right? Maybe like, no, I'm taking this really seriously, but I'm not gonna let it take over my life, right? But it'll be interesting to see how all that pans out, because I think what I definitely sense a very kind of stronger, right, desire for a better work-life balance. And I think that at the end of the day, I feel like that's a trade-off, right? Like one has to make, if
Yeah.
turn it into a business, then it's definitely going to take a lot more time.
Yeah, because I've had conversations with Gen Zers in my own business, in my staffing business, who've shown a spark. And I said, right, well, I'll support you on the path to being an entrepreneur and take over, do a new state in the US, do a new city. And often they've looked at me and thought, well, I couldn't take the sleepless nights. I couldn't take the strain. So I think, okay. But I think the thing that stuck out to me is that making it enjoyable, like you said, gamifying it, setting a mission, giving them clarity of something they can build and own, but maybe balance around they don't necessarily want or feel a need for the intense levels of stress and strain that come with being an entrepreneur business owner, but it's more about an enjoyable journey to build and learn is kind of how do I work my business so that they feel they're genuinely building something and they're part of something. Because it's interesting. I lost someone, an employee left about a month ago, and she had huge potential. And she was a talented athlete. So I supported this person quite a bit in terms of their training and time for training. And I could see the effect the training had on their performance at work. But it was interesting in the end in that it got to the point where I thought, right, if your side gig is working really well and the main job here, they're going to augment each other. But it didn't. It actually fractured it to the point where they thought, right, I've got to go do the side gig. And that's fair enough. You're going to get entrepreneurs like that, as galling as it is. And it made me take stock a lot of thinking, do I really want to invest time to supporting people on their side gigs and keeping them happy and doing it? And I think I went away, licked my wounds for a bit and thought, I need to do that, because for every one that peels off to say, I don't want to do staffing, I'm going to go and do this because I love it, it's fair enough. There's going to be 2 or 3 that will, I guess, appreciate the effort you're putting into them and will build within your sphere or your organization. So I don't think there's a magic formula to spot or separate that. You've just got to support everyone. And it wasn't that time consuming for me. It was more just getting inside their heads and understanding how I could help structure their day and their workload and their objectives to allow them to balance everything in their lives while it still worked for us. But I think that's probably one thing I talk to my clients a lot about is that it's very time consuming. It's quite hard because you've almost got a different work plan for each employee in a way, and there's becomes a point where you've got to say, well, hang on a minute, I can't do that for everyone. But there is I think that's something I'm going to see coming through is that ability to really customize and tailor your work day to suit versus the old days of saying, have we started on this? The Salaryman, right? 5 o'clock, we're all in the bar and we're there till 11 o'clock or till the customer's happy and leaves. And then you're back at your desk at 7 a.m.
Yeah, and I just want to applaud, right? Like the courage, right? Because I know in doing this and supporting your people is it's not easy when you're in a trench, right? Like you need your team, right, to get work done. In meantime, right, you equally value the importance of them having their own kind of passion project, their hobbies that mean tremendously for them, right? And that's you want them to feel like they're valued, right, by the company. And if I were to recall kind of back in my days with Atlassian, I've seen like plenty of those examples where people have their own passion projects, right? They want to spend 3 months cycling through Europe, or they want to do something that they for some social cause, they want to like go to some environments and do volunteer work there for extended period of time. And I see like the company was very like committing and supporting those. But the question is, right, like how do you balance that with the business work that we need to continue to get done, right? So there's this element about business continuity that's really all what it comes down to, right? And so it really amplifies really the importance of building this teamwork, right? So the company doesn't just rely on one single person, which would turn out to be a single point of failure, right? How do we build stronger teams that can back each other up? So then everybody, right, will have an opportunity when the timing, right, is right, when the opportunity comes to be able to do something they're passionate about, right? Even though that requires them to take some time outside of work. And for leaders like yourself, right, who can see the value of doing that, right, to be able to continue to support them, to continue on, right, having a high level engagement at work and then in their personal life. And I would say for a lot of people, and I'm assuming, right, it is going to be more and more important for the Gen Z population is to look at a company, right? And we describe them as employer branding, to look at a company and say, is this a company I want to join, right? And the answer will be yes, if this is a company that is going to support me for doing what I view as important, not just necessary doing the work, but I can continue to work on my own passion projects, whatever they are, right? They want a company that they can have both. They don't have to choose.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's been really good just chewing over these topics. It's given me an idea for the next one we can talk about. And I know you got to rush off to another meeting now because you're in high demand, but I'll talk to you separately about the next topic we've got.
Sounds fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me, Giles. Take
Thanks,
care.
Sophie.
Bye.
Bye.